Charlie Kirk has been shot at an event in Utah.
Horrific footage, just horrific.
Whooping and cheering over the video.
Womp womp. He got what he deserved.
That man, I forgive him.
I gotta say, to me, this is a gospel moment. And this is the essence, to me, of Christianity.
Potentially some kind of new wave of awakening or revival.
Getting right with God and giving your life to Jesus is the single most important decision you can make.
Nijay, what else was said as being more of some kind of Christian nationalism rally than just a memorial service?
Merging of Christian piety with American exceptionalism, American uniqueness, American...
I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them.
Nijay, do you think it would be dangerous to preach about abortion from the pulpit?
You 100% can't go out there and refer to a black woman as moral.
A moronic black woman.
You just can't, and he does.
This might get a little spicy here. The Democrat Party does support all the things God hates. I just think that's true.
I can't tell you how much that just hurt me, what you just said. I don't know if I've ever been on a podcast where someone has said something that hurtful to me.
What was hurtful about it? Welcome to today's edition of the show. I'm Justin Brierley, today in conversation with Bethel McGrew and Nijay Gupta about the Charlie Kirk moment. Why has the assassination of a young political activist led to thousands of people apparently returning to church, some for the first time, while provoking very different reactions on both the left and right? Well, we're going to leap into the conversation shortly, but if you do enjoy this video, it helps others to see it too if you give it a like, and why not get more Thinking Faith from the channel by subscribing? You know the drill, ding that notification bell. We'd love to hear what you think as well. Do feel free to drop a comment in the comment section. Now, up to 200,000 people are reported to have attended the memorial service for Charlie Kirk, and millions, of course, watched around the world, even while others were celebrating his assassination in the wake of his death. Charlie Kirk's Christian faith appears to have struck a chord with many, and even led to reports of a revival moment in the USA. But others are concerned that a figure whose politics they consider divisive is now being lionized as some sort of Christian martyr. Well, on the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God podcast, we've been tracing the many influences that seem to be part of a turning of the tide on secularism in the West. And arguably this Charlie Kirk moment is reflective of some kind of a vibe shift. But as we've asked many times in this season of the show, is true faith being re-embraced, or is this moment being co-opted for a political purpose? Well, we're going to be talking through that and much more with my guests here on the show. Bethel McGrew is a Christian thinker and writer. She's an author on her Substack, Further Up. She's been writing there about hopeful signs of renewal in the wake of Kirk's death, and believes he has proven a good example of how to balance free speech, winsome engagement, and Christian faith. Nijay Gupta is a New Testament theologian whose Substack article, "If You Are Elevating Charlie Kirk, Consider Who You Are Crushing Underfoot," has been widely shared, reflecting on some of Charlie Kirk's more controversial statements in that blog on race. Nijay wrote, "Please consider how your unqualified praise for Kirk will inevitably have an equal and opposite reaction of marginalization and harm for people of color, people like me." So I think we're going to have an interesting conversation. Bethel and Nijay, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to have you both with me. Why don't we start just with what happened at the time of recording about 3 weeks ago. I remember where I was, funnily enough, sort of just starting to wrap up my home group. And I saw a notification come through on my phone, BBC, Charlie Kirk has been shot at an event in Utah. Later on in the evening, it transpired he had been killed. And I thought, woo, that's a big moment. I didn't really anticipate how big, actually, and just how much attention that killing, that assassination would receive. But what were your immediate thoughts and reactions in the aftermath? I'll start with you, Nijay.
Yeah, I mean, what an age we live in where we can pull these things up on our phones and see horrific footage, just horrific. My kids, I have 3 teenagers, and immediately alerted them, or they may have alerted my wife. And people around me have likened it to the horrors of 9/11 in terms of witnessing video footage of just something no human, let alone young people, should ever witness. And it's really a sign of deep, deep, deep brokenness in our world, and especially in the United States.
Bethel, what were your initial reactions?
Yeah, I echo what Nijay just said. It's just shocking that the video spread so quickly, and it's just right there. You could just click on it and see it. And I clicked on it, assuming that it would be bad, but not as bad as it was. And I thought, oh my goodness. And then I was in a group chat, just kind of monitoring the situation, waiting to see what might happen. There was like a brief moment where people thought maybe he would survive, and then we all know that that wasn't the case. So yeah, just following it in real time on Twitter and gradually having kind of a delayed realization of the momentousness of the moment, because I was somewhat familiar with Kirk, but I just didn't know how widely he was loved or hated as it happened. And we'll get into some of those reactions.
What did you make of some of those reactions? Because obviously, as much as there was a lot of grief being expressed immediately in the aftermath, there were people sadly celebrating. What were your thoughts on that, Bethel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist, and so I'm not supposed to be very shockable, but I was still pretty shocked by just the breadth. I mean, I saw university professors, so okay, I could anticipate that, but then also medical personnel, first responders, people just, pretty much any walk of life you can think of. A friend of mine, local friend, texted me, and she couldn't get through her work shift at a restaurant without her coworkers like whooping and cheering over the video. And, she had a friend or like, guys, this is not okay, but it was just like two people against a little crowd, basically. And so that just kind of sank in, like, wow, like there was just a deep, deep grudge against this guy. And people were very, comfortable just sharing this online and assuming that there wouldn't be any social repercussions for that. And so that was something to see.
Nijay?
I've become more and more disillusioned with social media and its dynamics, sometimes referred to as the dark algorithms. And one of the effects of these dark algorithms is dehumanization. This is a human being made in the image of God. This was a person that was willingly, openly having public conversations at intellectual environments like colleges, to have gracious listening, discussion, and to be murdered, assassinated. We cannot celebrate death. It completely stands against humanity. It completely stands against everything that Jesus stands for, to celebrate death in any way of anyone. And so if my kids, and they didn't, but if they ever said anything positive about, I would have a sit down with them and I'd say, we need to remember human loss is a loss for everyone all of the time.
We'll discuss it in more detail during the course of the show, but at the same time, obviously, your article was also concerned at the other end of the spectrum, people perhaps lionizing and endorsing everything around Charlie Kirk. I mean, his death has been described by some as a sort of a modern Christian martyr. What do you make of that sort of language surrounding Charlie?
Yeah, when I wrote this article, I took a week because I did want to take time to process it, and I got lots of input from folks, and I wanted to make sure that I was very explicit that I don't hate Charlie Kirk. I don't even really dislike Charlie Kirk, but I'm really concerned because when we turn people into saints and martyrs, it's easy to make them one-dimensional and only emphasize the things we liked about the person. And so when I talk about these algorithms on social media, what I see in my feed is very different than when someone else sees in their feed, sometimes drastically different, like they're two completely different people. And when I just Googled Charlie Kirk, I recognized his name. I recognized his persona, connection to certain political views. But I was just shocked by some of the things that he said, which we'll get into about certain black people, about black people in general, about Indians. I'm the son of immigrants from India. About LGBTQ people. I live in Portland, Oregon, with one of the probably highest percentage of LGBTQ identifying folks. I was horrified that people at church would be celebrating somebody that said the things that Charlie Kirk did. Now, I will say, mourning the loss of a public figure is not only acceptable, but I think a good thing for Christians to do. In the same way we pray about natural disasters, in the same way we pray about any loss of life at a school shooting. But unqualified, and that's the key word, unqualified sanctification, whatever hagiographic, deeply troubling for not just who it supports, certain group, but more importantly for who it harms. And that's where I come in.
Well, I mean, the short response, if you would, Bethel, and then we'll maybe play a clip in and continue the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of layers to this. I appreciated some things I saw Justin Giboni saying about this. Justin, if you're familiar, he works with the AND campaign. To my left on a number of issues, so we certainly wouldn't agree on everything. But I think he had a perceptive word here when he said he was comfortable with people who would kind of as a formality say, yes, of course, political violence is horrible. I condemn the killing, but, and he said, they would say but really quickly and kind of, move quickly on to their talking points. And here's my, my top 10 terrible podcast quotes that we all need to be talking about. And I guess I would just disagree that was the time or the place to center that kind of thing. Because I think, when a man dies, it's a good moment to sort of step back and try not to miss the forest for the trees and get a sense of, okay, what was this man's whole legacy? What was the arc of his life? And I'm not here to say that I agree with every word that came out of Charlie Kirk's mouth. I don't think he was perfect. I had some serious disagreements with him. But, I think it's good to just kind of sit and not rush so quickly to make this moment all about us, whoever we might be.
Well, let's take a moment to look at some of the speeches, eulogies that were shared at the memorial service. As I say, a huge crowd in a football stadium that turned out, and a wide variety of people who came on stage to talk about Charlie. Two particular moments have been replayed a number of times. Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, speaking, and an extraordinary moment in which she grants forgiveness to the killer, but then followed swiftly by Donald Trump with a rather different kind of message. Let's watch some of these clips.
That man, that young man, I forgive him. I forgive him because it was what Christ did and is what Charlie would do. The answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us. The world needs Turning Point USA. It needs a group that will point young people away from the path of misery and sin.
In that private moment on his dying day, we find everything we need to know about who Charlie Kirk truly was. He was a missionary with a noble spirit and a great, great purpose. He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that that's not right, but I can't stand my opponent.
There you go. Two rather different moments from the memorial service for Charlie Kirk. Thoughts, Nijay? What did you make of the memorial as a whole?
I didn't watch it. To be honest, it was too gut-wrenching. And we could talk about that later if we end up talking about Christian nationalism. But I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I did see this clip of Erica, and I gotta say, to me, this is a gospel moment, and this is the essence to me of Christianity. When I wrote the book Strange Religion, which I know you've read, Justin, when people say, how do we become strange, like those first Christians were strange, I tell them, read the Sermon on the Mount. And a lot of the stuff that Eric was saying was from that. She actually echoes Martin Luther King Jr. as well. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. I believe her. There's 2 Greek words for forgiveness in the New Testament, aphiemi, which means to release, and there's charizomai, which means to show grace. Probably charizomai is the more difficult one, and I think she meant that. I think she meant to show favor. It actually reminds me of that story you might remember from America where there was a shooting at an Amish community, children's school, and the Amish community not only decided to forgive the shooter who killed himself, but even to show up at the funeral, at his funeral, and they even stood in front of the cameras to block the widow so the cameras didn't take pictures. And they set up a fund to pay for the child of the shooter to go to college. That's charizomai. I think in her heart, I think that's what Erica was expressing. I think it's beautiful. And I think those moments give me hope for the beauty of the gospel to still be growing and active and alive in my America.
Similar sentiments, I imagine, Bethel, when it comes to Erica's speech?
Yeah, it was a beautiful speech. Just a powerful moment. But then, yes, interestingly juxtaposed with those words from Trump, who is nothing if not honest. He certainly doesn't pretend to be something he's not. And, I think there is a bit of a which way Western man meme there, or which way American man, it's the way of grace or the way of Trump. And I think it's complicated. I think moments of revival historically have been contextualized politically, culturally. So I don't know that there's ever been such a thing as a purely spiritual revival. So these things are all bound up together. I did watch the memorial, all 5 hours of it or whatever. I live tweeted, which was kind of entertaining. And I thought it was a mixed bag. There were parts of it that I thought were really pure and sweet and just like pure gospel. I thought Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave an excellent presentation of the gospel as well. That was a wonderful speech. Other speeches, not so much. Tucker Carlson. Yeah, I mean, we could go on. There's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. But I do think that the ideas of, that this is Christian nationalism, this is this terrible, horrible threat, I think those are overblown. Even though I'm not a Trump supporter, I'm not a MAGA supporter. That's not really my tribe.
It was obviously Charlie Kirk's tribe, and I imagine the tribe of a number of people who came out to the memorial. I mean, Nijay, we'll come back to this again, but what was it about what else was said, I suppose, in the memorial that gave you the vibes of this being more of some kind of Christian nationalism rally than just a memorial service?
I mean, a lot of it is who is speaking there. I mean, you have Christian artists and Christian speakers, which I think tells you one story. And then you have politicians, and you have the President of the United States. You have Stephen Miller, for example. And so, I think of the parable, the wheat and the tares, and I know I'm taking it out of context here, but, American exceptionalism, America first combined with Christian piety is notoriously dangerous. And I just finished a book where I have extensive chapters on Europe, especially Germany in the 1930s, 1940s, 1920s. And a lot of the stuff happening now, I believe, is out of that playbook. We can get into that later. But you have a guy who is probably the most famous person at the memorial who sells a branded God Bless USA Bible and has made $1.3 million on it, who has said in the past, always get even. When somebody screws you, screw them back in spades. He said when he got elected, I am your retribution. And he openly contradicts what I believe is the most important teaching of Jesus, love of enemy and forgiveness, which is in the Lord's Prayer. I wrote a book on the Lord's Prayer about 15 years ago. The Lord's Prayer is the most studied, most recited, most memorized, and most vocalized piece of literature in all of history and all of the world, regardless of language or religion. And we have the most prominent speaker at that memorial openly rejecting the teaching of Jesus, and people cheering, and people laughing. And I don't want to get sidetracked, but I'll just say this: when I was going to post my piece on Charlie Kirk, some very close people who do kind of prominent publishing, said, be really careful because the world could get very dangerous for you very quickly. And it is because of things that are said, like some of the things said at the memorial, that make America more dangerous for me now than when I was growing up.
You want to respond to that, Bethel?
Yeah. I mean, I don't live in Nijay's circumstance, and so I'd have to kind of hear more of what he means by America being dangerous to him personally, as an Indian man. I mean, Nijay, I know that you have a successful career in biblical scholarship. You seem to be doing well, thriving where you are. I guess to try to find some common ground here. I have always been very much never Trump. Going all the way back to the beginning of his run. I didn't vote for him the first time. I didn't vote for him the second time. And I do think that there's some tragedy in the fact that Charlie Kirk spent so much of his short life just pouring himself into the Trump brand and the Trump campaign. And I understand why he did it. He had a very pragmatic approach to politics that, like, this is the only way that we can keep the Democrats from winning, because if the Democrats win, more babies are going to die. Like more kids are going to be transed and that kind of thing. It's a sort of Flight 93 attitude. Flight 93 was the plane that went down in 9/11, and some people tried to save it. So I understand that mentality, but I guess I have a more tragic vision of politics. That when a character like Trump comes along, you just have to say no to the Faustian bargain. And Kirk felt like he couldn't do that. He felt like it would be an abandonment of his civic duty to say no to that deal. And I disagree, and I think there's a sadness in that. At the same time, I think what Erica exemplified, and I think what Charlie exemplified, what the two of them as a couple exemplified, is that you could be very misguided, your loyalties could be very misplaced in some ways, and yet you could still be sincere, faithful Jesus followers, and your lives can still bear gospel fruit.
Well, let's talk about some of the potential gospel fruit that actually appears to have come out of in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. There have been numerous reports on social media and elsewhere of many people saying they're going to church for the first time, picking up a Bible for the first time. And I'm just going to play a few clips from social media of some of the responses that have been shared, and indeed one pastor talking about the extraordinary turnout and number of people coming to Christ in the immediate aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death. Hi there, I hope you're enjoying the show. If you'd like a free chapter from my book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, and also from my latest book, Why I'm Still a Christian, then subscribe to my newsletter and I'll send you those chapters along with updates on my work. I won't spam you, just encourage you with Thinking Faith articles, events, videos and resources. The newsletter link is with the info. Enjoy the rest of the show.
I've never ever opened a Bible before. In fact, I know nothing about Christianity or Jesus. But yesterday, after witnessing the assassination of Charlie Kirk on the internet, and it just being so normal to people, like watching this man get shot in the neck, and everybody being so desensitized and just going on with life like it was normal. Something was calling me to my husband's Bible. I don't know what I'm looking for in the Bible. I don't know why I felt like I needed to grab the Bible. But I grabbed my husband's Bible. And the page that I opened up to was the verse, John 8:32, and it said, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free."
I didn't know Charlie Kirk, never met that guy before in my life. And something else that I've never done before in my life is believe in God. I'm going to wear this suit to church. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to try to be a better father, husband, and leader for my family.
Today I went to church looking for God. I went to church to surrender myself to Him fully, go to church. I brought my kids and my brother, and let me tell you, every single seat in there was filled, and then some people were standing. We opened with worship, and the last song they dedicated to Charlie Kirk, talking about how God is there in our pain and sorrow. They touched on how Charlie was not murdered, he was martyred, and he gave his life to wake up Christians around the world.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had 533 professions of faith this past Sunday. Is that correct?
Yeah, I almost started weeping just hearing the number again. It's still overwhelming to even think about it. But yes, I mean, certifiably 533 decisions for Christ of every age. The generations were represented. Every race was represented. And by the way, for the listeners, this happened on Long Island, where less than 3% of the entire island statistically represents Protestantism. And, you know, so it's just like a staggering number. There's churches that in the entirety of their whole existence never see 533 decisions for Christ. And so, I've just been crying for the last couple of days thinking about how God would take a national tragedy like this and turn it around and use it for mass salvations.
That was Pastor Mike Signorelli speaking to Billy Hallowell, and a few clips of people sharing their experience of returning to church. You've been cataloguing some of this, Bethel, as well, in a recent blog post. What are you seeing? Why is this happening? Is it what it looks like? Potentially some kind of new wave of awakening or revival?
Yeah, it's wonderful, and for me, really unexpected, because I until all of this happened, I hadn't really been aware of Kirk as an evangelist per se. I thought of him as mainly a political figure. But since then, I've been watching tons and tons of clips and speeches and dialogues where he is really placing this front and center. You know, this is the most important thing. It's more important than politics. It's more important than Trump or whatever. You know, getting right with God and giving your life to Jesus is the single most important decision you can make. And so that message, it was already actually resonating with people even before he died. And there's a little clip I saw of him on his show saying that he'd gotten letters from people saying he was already inspiring them to go back to church. So to some extent, this has been percolating for a while. But then, I think what happened with the assassination is what you're seeing is the power of a single story to galvanize people. And some people are looking back at the George Floyd moment and how that was this watershed galvanizing moment because, this single man who emerged as this sort of a Christ figure. And, in one of those odd twists of history, Kirk is kind of emerging as something of a Christ figure. He's executed in this shocking way. And people begin to look into this and they go, I don't understand. He was just this, basically nice guy who loved his family and loved Jesus and was trying to have peaceful dialogue. And he's just shot in cold blood. And then all of my friends are celebrating it. My left-leaning friends, people on social media. And one common thread that I see as I look through a lot of these testimonies is people who are being shocked by evil. They're shocked by darkness. I saw one young woman said, I'm not really sure if God exists, but I can say for a fact I know that evil exists. And it's like she's sort of starting from there as her foundation and working her way forward. And so where this moment leads, I don't know, but I really see genuinely hopeful signs. And I mean, it could be underplayed, it could be overplayed, but I see lots of beautiful moments, people from all walks of life, men, women, gay, straight, poorer, richer, with families, single. It really seems to cut across demographics and have struck a chord.
Yes, you're right there. Though, would it be fair to say, and I don't know if this is what you've seen as you've looked at a lot of these clips, Bethel, that it tends to be still people who are arguably more sort of sympathetic to a kind of conservative vision and more on the right, if you like, of politics. Do you see many more progressive left-wing people sort of having a similar reaction, or would you say it's primarily perhaps people who haven't been around church or agnostic atheists, but who have suddenly sort of, I don't know, perhaps the Christian character of a person they, as you've formerly seen primarily as a political activist, has suddenly sort of spoken to them in some way?
Well, I mean, I think we do need to be careful not to assume that just because somebody is in a red state means that they're familiar with church or they're churched. There's a lot of people who might be, in some sense right-leaning, but have never stepped foot in a church in their lives, So I do see a lot of those people who are like, I know nothing about this. Like, how does church even work? Can you just like walk in, or do you have to make a reservation, or, but then, yes, I do see some people who it's like, I was at the church, but I've strayed, or I have some Christian family members who've been witnessing to me. So it's the whole mix. But I think you're right. It is by and large people who are conservative leaning. That may not necessarily mean that they're conservative on certain social issues. I mean, I've seen people who identify as gay or lesbian, for example, who, they may still be on a journey as far as that goes, as far as their sexuality goes. They might not feel like that's something they want to surrender yet. But they have other conservative kind of tendencies, and they feel like Kirk has been really maligned. And they're just curious. I think curiosity is just a big factor here. And seeking community. I saw somebody say, I just want to be around people. I want to be around good people. I want to be in a place where I feel safe,
Yeah, and it's across this side of the pond. I've been hearing stories. Even though Charlie Kirk was sort of an American sort of person and activist, I think a lot of people who weren't even that familiar with, because of the widespread news about it, have binge watched his stuff and ended up going to church. Even quite significant sort of figures on social media like Graham Linehan, comedian, sort of turned gender critical kind of commentator, saying he's picked up a copy of Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, looking into it. Even J.K. Rowling, interestingly, not necessarily directly connected to Charlie Kirk, but in the wake of it, talking about a God-shaped hole in her life and so on. So some interesting moments that seem to be developing. But Nijay, what do you make of all this yourself? What's your take on the Charlie Kirk-inspired revival?
Yeah, I do know, because of my job and the sorts of things I do across the country, church attendance has gone up. I think that's a couple of things. I do think there are a number of people who were from the video clip you showed very inspired because of Charlie Kirk, and I will say, I believe his faith was genuine. I believe his faith was the driving force of his life. I believe that when he said, I just want people to come to know Jesus, I completely believe that. And I've watched videos of these very tender moments where he talks about some of his very favorite verses, Romans 8, God works all things for the good of those who love him. I think if people are latching onto those moments and feel inspired to go to church, I think of Philippians chapter 1, where Paul's in prison, and he says, as long as Christ is preached, as long as Christ is preaching, people come to the Lord. Whatever the gate, whatever the pathway is great. At the same time, I want to know, there's a phrase I use with my students, what you win them with is what you win them to. So what version of the gospel are they coming to? And I worry about that. I worry deeply about that, because if, imagine someone who's inspired to go to church, and then they hear this quotation from Charlie Kirk: the Democratic Party supports everything that God hates. I hope you give a Sunday sermon, you talk about how the Democratic Party believes everything God hates. I worry if you show up to Sunday morning somewhere at that kind of church, because again, what you win them with is what you win them to. So what kind of revival are we talking about? When we talk about the wheat and the tares, can we separate the wheat from the tares? Can we make sure that this is about Jesus, that this is about reading Scripture, that this is about following the Sermon on the Mount and the Ten Commandments? I think all three of us would agree there are churches that we want people to go to, and there are churches that we don't want people to go to based on what we think is good and healthy Christian teaching. So it's where this revival goes. I trust the Spirit of God. I trust that people are discerning. But an unqualified sense of it's leading to an uptick in church attendance. I want to see where this goes.
Okay. Bethel, I mean, I'm hearing sort of similar concerns as Nijay expressed around the memorial service, that a mixture here of tender Christian, genuinely Christian moments and what he sees as a political rally of sorts. And I guess concerns that, this idea, what gospel are they being won to? Do you share any similar concerns?
Yeah, and I mean, I would echo what he was saying, that it does kind of matter what sort of church you go to, and God bless these people. They're probably just kind of picking churches at random. They don't know that the denominations or whatever. They could walk into some totally heretical place. And I mean, I would also say that just because a church may be politically right-leaning, that doesn't mean that its theology is very good. It could be preaching some kind of prosperity, charismatic nonsense. Sure, I think those are all good, legitimate concerns. I will say, though, and, this might get a little spicy here, the Democrat Party does support all the things God hates. I just think that's true. And so now, do I think that that's like appropriate for a pastor to get up and preach in a sermon every Sunday morning? Well, no. I mean, I believe in expository preaching. I think you should just, preach through whatever your biblical series is supposed to be. You don't have to make the pulpit into a place where you make political statements. But I mean, I also think that there are certain issues in this country that have become quote unquote political, but they're really just ethical. They're just moral. Killing babies. Is that a political issue? Well, I mean, I guess, but it shouldn't be just political. Giving children puberty blockers, cutting off their genitals. Is that a political issue? Well, I mean, yes, but also it's just a basic moral issue. So I think these are the kinds of things that pastors certainly shouldn't be afraid to speak about, speak into, at the risk of seeming quote unquote political, because it would be like a pastor at the time of the slave trade being worried about, if I talk about slavery, is that too political? Sometimes you have to be bold. You have to speak to the issues of the day and let the chips fall where they may.
DJ?
I can't tell you how much that just hurt me, what you just said. I don't know if I've ever been on a podcast where someone has said something that hurtful to me, but I respect your right to free speech.
What was hurtful about it?
The idea that an entire party of people, we're talking millions, we're talking many millions, okay, let's say 100 million people. Raphael Warnock, U.S. Senator, Senior Pastor, Ebenezer Baptist Church. Tim Kaine, devout Catholic, former VP nominee. Jimmy Carter, one of my heroes. Jimmy Carter, who, in an elderly age, picks up nails and hammer to support humanitarian causes. And the idea that Jimmy Carter is part of a party that supports everything that God hates. That's extreme language. And this is what I don't like in the rhetoric of modern day politics, is the always and nevers and the everything and nothings. I know extremely devout Democrats. I don't identify with one particular party, but I know extremely devout Democrats who I truly believe are trying to do the best for this country. And I know extremely devout Republicans. Same. So I believe in the ability to have discussions and debates and arguments about these things. I don't agree with everything that happens in the Democratic Party. I don't agree with everything that happens in the Republican Party. But the extreme language of everything. The Democratic Party believes everything that God hates. They also believe in love for the poor and support for the poor. and economic justice. And so I feel like it's I feel like it's very one-sided to say, hey, this Democratic Party does all these horrible things, and the Republican Party, do they also believe everything God hates, like justifying a leader with all of these sexual scandals, and the Epstein files and all of that? I want to be really even-handed and say there's some good, there's some bad. Let's be super discerning on this. So I just categorically reject this idea that we can just blanket say that. But my most important thing I'd say is the pulpit's not the place to do that. I think we should educate Christians on policy and encourage them where to find the right information where we can have statistics and data. But to preach it from the pulpit is extremely dangerous.
I'll let you respond, Bethel. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe I'll just ask Nijay a question. Nijay, do you think it would be dangerous to preach about abortion from the pulpit?
To me, that wouldn't be preaching. It would be, because preaching is preaching the word of God and helping to apply it to people's lives. So yeah, I wouldn't do that from the pulpit. I think churches should be talking about what's going on in society, right? Politics, lowercase p, is promoting the common good, right? From Paulus. And churches need to be front and center in promoting the common good, right? And we should be talking about what affects our community, our lives, our bodies. But the idea that we would connect a sermon from Scripture to a very particular political policy that good faith Christians are divided on, not the affirmation of life. Everybody agrees on that. I don't know any human being I've ever met who's ever not valued human life, but really some of the finer details of it. Okay, I feel like that's not preaching material, but it is important that we have seminars in our churches where we talk about what are the policies, what's going on, what are the ideologies behind it. What are the scripture texts that help us reflect on this? We teach Christian discernment. We don't teach official public policies.
Bethel, respond.
Yeah, well, I can kind of sense it. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but I can sense that, I would probably have some quite serious disagreements there with Nijay. As far as being even-handed, sure. Like I've actually never once in my adult voting life cast a vote for a Republican in a presidential general election. Or a Democrat. I am a secret third thing. Sure, I'm happy to criticize individual Republicans. However, I do think there is an asymmetry in terms of the official platforms, and what is considered kosher. I mean, you can't really get much of anywhere in the Democrat Party if you're pro-life. They will shout you down and chase you out. It is not acceptable. Okay. I think that says something about the culture, the overall culture of a party, So that's what I mean. And there's then, the whole suite of gender and sexuality issues. Now, Nijay, you also mentioned, well, what about care for the poor? Like, isn't that a good thing that Democrats care about? Well, I mean, again, that's a whole, issue unto itself. I can agree that, in principle, you could be a person who votes Democrat who sincerely wants to help the poor. I don't deny that. I believe that there are sincere people. However, I think that they're misguided about how best to actually help the poor. And I think that more conservative fiscal policies are actually more beneficial if you want to help the poor, and that that was something that Kirk talked about quite a bit. Kirk was very interested in what's actually effectual. What will be of the most good to the most people, and he sincerely believed that Democrat policy across a whole range of issues, social, fiscal, whatever, were hurting the common good and actually hurting the people they claimed to want to help.
Well, before we get into a debate on economics, let's put a pin in that, and because I'm sure we'll get around to this issue again in another form. I do want to play another clip in, and this is moving into sort of some of these debates and sort of prove me wrong stuff that Charlie did on college campuses and so on, and just to give us a sense of his sort of debate style, the way he engaged. He was obviously. A lot has been said about his commitment to free speech and being willing to go into these student spaces. So let's see some of what happened when he did that.
So I'm particularly concerned about your brand of Christianity as a Christian myself. Christian nationalism, I do not agree with at all. I think it's antithetical to the values of the early church. And I think, how do you reconcile especially white Christians in this America, marrying politics and power with their faith in this country?
There's a lot there. I've never described myself as a Christian nationalist. So I'm a Christian and a nationalist, so I've never used those two
And then right there, that and nationalist, where in the scriptures does a Christian...
Well, thank you. Jeremiah 29:7, demand the welfare of the nation that you are in because your welfare is tied to your nation's welfare. Let me continue.
Do you feel proud of yourself for debating college kids who are unprepared to speak in front of an audience like yourself? Hold on. You're 30 years old. We can agree you're 30 years old, right? Do you think that's a little bit silly?
Are you a voter?
I am a voter. I'm a registered
so
voter.
I vote and you vote. So I'm talking to voters of this country that will determine the future of Western civilization. That's what I'm doing here today. Yeah?
You create a company that's like close to being a fascist, and then
Okay. How am I?
Sorry.
Let's go through this. How am I a fascist?
Dude, you...
Can you name one thing I believe that's fascist?
You believe that, you are...
You're a stochastic terrorist.
What is that?
You're targeting a minority group. You're targeting trans people
Got it.
specifically.
What is a woman?
That's a stupid ass question, dude. That's a dumb ass question.
What is a woman, college student?
What is a woman? Oh, you're talking to a college student instead of I don't know, someone who has media training?
They can't answer what a woman is. It's not a trick question. What is a woman?
Someone who identifies as a woman.
What is that thing? You can't answer the question with the question. It's like saying, what is the sun? The sun is something that looks like the sun. What is a woman?
It's a social role.
No, you can't answer the question with... Yeah, define the woman without saying woman.
So do you love America?
Yes, I do.
I hate America. Every state in the USA should be an independent country. What do you think of this?
Well, I just first have to ask, since you hate the country, do you plan to leave?
What do you mean by that?
Do you plan to go live in another country?
No, I do not.
Let me tell you something.
Your face is an idiot.
America is the only country where even those who hate it refuse to leave. That's how you know you live in a great country.
I see you giving an approving sort of fist bump to some of those clips, Bethel. So, yeah, I think you've generally seen Charlie's style of engaging these kinds of debates on college campuses as quite good. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think those are very entertaining clips. But something that has impressed me is, as I watch a whole bunch of these clips, is Kirk really had a gift for calibrating his rhetoric to the needs of the moment and to the needs of the student in front of him. And so some students, you can see in some of those clips, and others are really not there to engage in good faith. They're there to troll. They're there to be obnoxious. They call him names. And I'm just very impressed, really, with his patience. I watched a clip that was a solid 15, 16 minutes long, and this young gender-confused girl is just hurling all kinds of insults at Charlie, and he just lets her talk. He doesn't respond in kind. He's sort of gently humorous with her, but he doesn't punch down. He tells the crowd to be quiet and let her speak. And so I think he just really had a gift for that. And sometimes he could tell, okay, this person needs to be put in his place. This person's hogging the mic, thank you, next. But then other times somebody would come up and share something very vulnerable. Or somebody would say, I really just genuinely disagree with you about this. Can we have a good faith argument? And Charlie would say, yeah, let's do that. Let's have a little good faith debate right here. So I think that's really where he shined, actually. I think that was his best, medium, so to speak, of interaction. I think he was better in that context than perhaps, on Twitter or in the studio doing his podcast. There's something about that incarnational medium that brought out the best in him.
I think you've also mentioned his engagements with some women who were in pornography and so on. I think there was a sort of popular podcast video show called the Whatever Podcast, where I think he kind of engaged. And it's obviously, these things are obviously designed to be kind of provocative and clickbaity and so on. But you were quite impressed actually with the way he conducted himself in that scenario.
So impressed with that. I mean, these women, these young women, very damaged, incredibly hypersexualized, tried to bait him. I mean, one woman in particular really tried to bait him in a very inappropriate way. And he was just like a model of masculine courtesy and chivalry. He was compassionate. He was very clear. He said, I don't think this is the way to use your bodies. This is not how God designed you. This isn't what you're created for. But I have sympathy. I have compassion for you. And I'm praying that God will lead you out of this lifestyle and into the light, because I think he wants what's best for you. And I want you to have what I have with my wife, because I think sex is a beautiful gift from God. It needs to be reserved for that context.
Nijay.
Similar. I think he really shined in those environments. I love the idea of going to college campuses and talking to people. I will say nobody's really going to match him in knowledge and speed of recall. I would hate to have debated him. I would have lost instantly because he was rehearsed. He's very casual, comfortable. I think Bethel was correct. He knows when to hit which elements of his rhetoric. His data knowledge recall's good. I mean, I think sometimes he said things he shouldn't have said, but I will say it may be a little manipulative is too strong a word. I mean, he was surely going to win most arguments. So let's put it that way. He was surely going to win most arguments with people just walking up and starting to yell things at him. And I think he did much better when he was debating actual practice scholars, like, for example, in Cambridge and Oxford, where he had more test of wits with, sadly he's passed, but I would love to have seen him debate Cornel West. Wouldn't have just been the coolest thing ever to see two incredible, brilliant thinkers go toe to toe on religion and politics. But yeah, if he were at a college campus where my daughter was, I'd say go and listen and learn and see what you learn and come away. I mean, this is what American educational experience is all about. Like, if someone assigned a Charlie Kirk book in school and said, I would say, yeah, read it, read everything, learn as much as you can, because I think he has some great arguments. I think he has some not so great arguments. And I think he's wrong on some things, but I think that is, one of the things that should carry on from his legacy is having open public debate. I do wish it was more well matched, but I think that's one of the best parts of his legacy.
What would you have said? I'm sure the conversation went longer than the short clip we showed there, but the first conversation was between him and a student on Christian nationalism, and he quoted that well-known passage from Jeremiah, seek the good of the city, and said, this is what we do as Christians. We're interested in the national good, and so on. What is that a sort of, for you, an interesting defense of Christian nationalism, Nijay?
Absolutely not. I actually had to look it up because he used language I was unfamiliar with. He said demand the welfare, and most translations I'm looking at now say seek the welfare. And my Greek is better than my Hebrew, but it's very similar in Greek as is in Hebrew from the Septuagint. And the language of seek is very soft. It's not very hard. I think it's the Hebrew's darash, but someone could correct me. The Greek is zeteo, and it literally means pursue, but it's often used in a lighter way. These are actually people in exile, so they can't do a whole lot of demanding under those circumstances. And when it says welfare, it's very interesting. The Greek translates it as peace, and I assume the Hebrew is similar to that. And so you're not demanding goods. You are trying to be at peace with an empire. And by the Holy Spirit, God can make that happen. That's very different than saying we need to convert this country into a Christian country. We need to make everything more Christian. Theoretically, if sin weren't a problem, I love the idea of a Christian nation. We can all worship. We can all do everything for the sake of Jesus. The problem is human sinfulness. And you know what I think the greatest force that can combat Christian nationalism? the Lord of the Rings. Tolkien basically says we need to be careful about the One Ring. We need to be careful about what we do with power. And what actually empowered the earliest Christians was their ability to say, I have to choose this in the midst of going against the grain, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of taking up my cross. I don't know if everything was Christian all the time, everywhere, in the sort of perfect ways that we sometimes dream, why we would ever need to take up our cross. So we could have a longer conversation about this because I end up talking about this a lot. But I am concerned with Christian nationalism. Now, let me differentiate Christian nationalism from Christian patriotism. Christian patriotism, in my opinion, is this idea that I want to bring more of the best of Christianity to the world around me. Because I believe that the Bible teaches the things that will make for a more perfect union. I firmly believe that. Things in the Sermon on the Mount, the things in the Ten Commandments, I think that leads to a more perfect union. And it's great to love your country. I love my country. My parents came in the 1970s as immigrants. I love my country. I feel free most of the time in my country. I'm proud to have an American passport. But there's a difference between that and saying America is the best country because we are founded on Christian values, and that our government should be a quote-unquote Christian government. God didn't die to save governments. He died to save people, and those people collectively in churches are the people of God.
Your thoughts on that, Bethel?
So, yeah, I agree with much of what Nijay says there. I would consider myself a Christian patriot, but, I mean, if somebody asks me, are you a Christian nationalist, I immediately, just like Charlie did, I want to ask, what do you mean by that? And there is, I think, a pretty small group of people, they're mostly on Twitter, they kind of sit around wearing tweed and smoking pipes who kind of fantasize about, this Christian prince who's going to, make America theocratic again. I'm like, dream on, tweed bros, because that ain't happening, and it's just like Nijay was saying, there's this thing called sin. And there's also this thing called checks and balances, right? And I think in that sense, Charlie was very liberal, and I'm using liberal in, the sort of the more technical political meaning of the term. He very much believed in, American founding values of, democracy, a republic if you can keep it, all that good stuff. So I think he would have been he would have found theocratic kind of language pretty alien to what he was interested in talking about. However, the problem, though, is that when you look at how, somebody like Rob Reiner, the filmmaker, how he talks about Christian nationalism, and he makes documentaries about this, his idea of quote-unquote Christian nationalism is, Christians peacefully protesting Roe versus Wade, okay? It's Christians who believe that marriage is between a man and a woman and who don't think it's a good idea for the government to enshrine a different definition of marriage. Okay, according to some people, that already equals Christian nationalism. And I would say, well, I mean, okay, fine, then I guess I'm a Christian nationalist if you want to say that, but I don't think that's a proper definition of the term. I think that's an inflation of the term. So I imagine Charlie would have said something similar, that, okay, fine, call me a Christian nationalist if you want to, but I'm interested in biblical principles and the common good.
I like that he wanted people to define it. I will say, this might be helpful, Justin. You might have seen this. This came out maybe a week or two ago. Correct me if I'm wrong. Pete Hegseth, who's the defense secretary, put out a video on social media where he voices the Lord's Prayer, remembering that I wrote a book on this 10, 15 years ago, and showing the military, scenes for the military, scenes of vehicles of warfare. And to me, this is the essence of what I would define as Christian nationalism, a merging of Christian piety with American exceptionalism, American uniqueness, American divine authority from God, that sort of thing. And it really disturbs me because this is right out of the playbook of the 1930s and 40s. And I know this gets macabre, and maybe Bethel will want to push back on this, but this is the 1923 Nazi Minister of Church Affairs. True Christianity is represented by the party, and the German people are now called by the party, especially the Führer, to a real Christianity. The Führer is the head of a new revelation. And in 1934, Barmen Declaration, Jesus Christ is our only Lord. there should be no other authority. So the Pete Hegseth thing is to me the essence of Christian nationalism.
I'll give you a quick opportunity to respond to that, Bethel, and then we'll move on to some other issues that Charlie was seen as controversial around.
Yeah, I think that reaction is kind of overblown. I mean, I would agree that it's going back to the 30s and 40s, but it goes back to America of the 30s and 40s. I mean, I love World War II history, actually. It's kind of an obsession of mine. And I've read a lot about chaplains in the war. That's something I'm very fond of researching. And I mean, I think a lot of chaplains of times past, if you were to put them in a time machine, show them that video, they would have been like, cool. It's like, praying the Lord's Prayer. I pray the Lord's Prayer over my soldiers, before they go out to fight, for their safety and well-being. And so, now Pete Hegseth personally, as a role model, as a Christian leader, I'm not, I plead the fifth on that as far as that goes. But, that particular video, let's just say I wouldn't leap to make comparisons to Nazi Germany. I'll leave it there.
Now, a lot of what has been circulating in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination is certain, depending on which algorithm you're in, you will get a very different feed as to Charlie Kirk. You'll either get hero and martyr or potentially terrible political activist, divisive figure who said terribly racist things. Now, so it's not difficult to find some of the more controversial statements he's made, and you talk about a number of those yourself, Nijay. Here's just one example that has been pulled out from one particular show that Charlie contributed to. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God has been making waves since its launch. Many have predicted the death of God, not least the new atheists who proclaimed that science and reason would eradicate religion. And if you look at the statistics on church-going and belief in the modern West, you might be tempted to believe them. But there's an alternative story to be told about the surprising rebirth of belief in God. What if the tide of faith is beginning to come in again? I'm Justin Brierley, and I've been hosting conversations on faith between skeptics, seekers and believers all my adult life. Now, on the award-winning The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, discover the story of why new atheism grew old and secular thinkers are considering Christianity again. Featuring interviews with leading thinkers across the faith spectrum, you'll learn the inside account of the rise and fall of new atheism. Why secular intellectuals like Jordan Peterson, Louise Perry and Tom Holland are talking about faith again. How developments in science, history, psychology and consciousness are pointing many back towards a divine mind. And why our modern day meaning crisis is priming a generation to investigate whether the biblical vision of life in all its fullness could be true after all. Plus, you'll see and hear live events debating the surprising rebirth and hear from many adult converts who, after searching for a story to live by, were surprised to find the Christian story made sense of their lives. All 30 episodes of Season 1 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God are available now. Listeners like Mark say this has to be the most thought-provoking podcast on the internet. Find out why we've become a #1 ranked religion and spirituality podcast when you jump in at episode 1. Go to justinbrierley.com/surprisingrebirth to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That's justinbrierley.com.
This United story and the DEI story hits so hard because we've all been in the back of a plane when the turbulence hits or when you're flying through a storm and you're like, I'm so glad I saw the guy with the right stuff and the square jaw get into the cockpit before we took off. And I feel better now thinking about that.
You want to go thought crime? Like, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Well, that's the you wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have. You wouldn't have done that before.
That's not an immediate.
No, you wouldn't have done that before.
That's not who I am. That's not what I believe.
It is the.
So that's and Charlie Kirk has said similar things regarding essentially, his concerns around black pilots, people who are in of color in various positions because of his concerns that they are there for the wrong reasons, as part of affirmative action, DEI, and so on. And he's also been quoted often as saying he believes the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. But here's him in conversation with someone at one of his events.
You said the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so the parts of the Civil Rights Act were great, but the way it's now being implemented to force men in female bathrooms to push forward of the trans agenda, the intent of the Civil Rights Act is way beyond what it was originally authored for.
But the intent specifically originally was to...
Well, that's interesting. So the intent and the law are two different things. So the intent was noble, which was to say that no American can be not allowed into a place of business based on the color of their skin or their ethnic heritage. Totally agreement with that. That's not what the law only did. It created a massive anti-racist DEI army that then gave us affirmative action. For example, recently Merrick Garland sued using the Civil Rights Act, saying that we cannot have voter ID in certain states because it's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. So basically what the Civil Rights Act did is that it went beyond disparate impact and then went to disparate effect. In the sense where if black Americans are not doing as well as white Americans in a certain category, you can now use the Civil Rights Act and say that's a violation of the Civil Rights Act, even though there might be other contributing factors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's too broad, too wide, and it's now doing a lot of damage to the country. It's being used well beyond its original intent.
So just a couple of clips there, sort of representing some of the controversial aspects of this, though you quote others in your article. This is where the meat, if you like, of your critique of Charlie Kirk's positions is in your own Substack article. Nijay, for instance, you say Kirk commented on public-facing civil servant black women like Michelle Obama and Ketanji Brown Jackson. These black women do not have brain processing power to be taken seriously. You have to go steal a white person's slot. Okay, talk us through some of these concerns of yours then, Nijay, and we'll see what Bethel has to say in response.
Yeah. What Charlie Kirk was talking about is this is one of my major concerns with platforming Charlie Kirk is, I'm an academic. I've published about 25 books, and they go through rigorous fact checking. They get fact checked by an editor. They get fact checked by copy editors. The publisher has a major interest in making sure that I'm not caught saying things that aren't true. Right. And so I've had things taken out of books where they say, can you prove this? I say, no, but I know it's true. They said, if you can't prove it, then you can't say it. Happens all the time. Happens to me hundreds of times. And so my undergraduate major was public relations. If I were Charlie Kirk's PR person, I would say, you 100% can't go out there and refer to a black woman as moronic. You just can't. And he does. You 100% can't refer to George Floyd as a scumbag. You just can't do that. Why? Because people will take it out of context. It will go viral, and it will influence people. Okay? Charlie Kirk was young. I mean, I'm 15 years older than him. He was a young person. And I think over time, he may have gotten to the place where he could say it in a better way. But when you talk about these women and say they do not have the processing power to otherwise be taken seriously, they went to Harvard Law. Okay, they went to Harvard, these two women, which is why I mentioned them. In the U.S. News and World Report rankings, I went to Miami University for my undergraduate degree, which ranks 1,354. I went to the University of Durham for my PhD, which ranks 292. I was on a full scholarship. I didn't pay a single penny in tuition. I graduated with no corrections, which is one of the highest you can achieve in the UK. And if someone that went to Harvard is being referred to as not having enough brain processing power to otherwise be taken seriously, what hope do I have of the whole world telling me that I am not a DEI graduate and candidate? Okay, I hold the Julius R. Manti Distinguished Professorship at Northern Seminary. And how is it possible I could ever prove to anybody, ever, that I am not DEI, even though I work my butt off every single day for the money I have and the position I have? And so when we make brain processing references to people, now I think it would have been okay if he said, I have legitimate, serious, and documented concerns about the abuse of affirmative action and DEI policy. Yeah, those have been around since I was growing up. Those are around the 90s. Those concerns were around the 90s. These aren't new concerns. So I think the way he said it fuels racism and xenophobia. If he did a data-driven discussion every single time, I will say sometimes he does get into the weeds, and I think that's great. And sometimes he doesn't. But as a PR major, the times you don't will lead people to think things about what you think and what you say. And when you have global influence, or at least national influence of the kind he had, he needed copy editors to say, take out the word moronic, take out the word scumbag, and just say, I have legitimate, documented, data-driven concerns about the abuses of affirmative action policy. You know what, Justin? I also have those concerns. As an Indian man in America, I have those concerns. But those concerns should be handled in patient, data-driven discussions versus talking about somebody's brain processing power.
Bethel, you're nodding in agreement with some of that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair critique. And I mean, I think this was a struggle that Kirk had, because he kind of had a couple different voices, so to speak. And I mean, I think what you saw in those clips is he kind of had his Rush Limbaugh hat on, right? You know, he's with the guys, with the bros, and it's like, this is the kind of stuff you say for the group chat, Charlie. Like, you know, you just like, so yeah, I mean, definitely. Now, to be clear, that phrase "moronic black woman," that's a hypothetical. So it wasn't like he was telling an actual story about somebody he encountered at the store who he was describing as moronic. It was like suppose I had this encounter. So, which, I mean, it's subtle, but that's good to clarify. And yeah, the phrase brain processing power just clouds the issue. Now, if you wanted to say that somebody like Ketanji Brown Jackson was a partisan hack, and she wasn't qualified for SCOTUS for that reason, sure, I mean, she might be natively quite bright, but I mean, she didn't want to define what a woman was. So, I mean, I don't think she should have been on the Supreme Court for all kinds of reasons. But frame the discussion that way. Don't frame it as, she's a stupid, stupid black woman. That's not a good PR move. So now, I do think, though, that this is where, again, I think Nijay might say, and I agree, but he should have framed it better. I think what Charlie was trying to get at is the structure of DEI, the structure of affirmative action, makes it unfair for everybody, including qualified minorities. People like Nijay or people who are like, hey, I worked my butt off to get where I am. If you walked up to Charlie and you said that, Charlie would say, yeah, I agree. This is not fair to you, because now you're walking around, spending your life thinking, well, at some point in this chain of events, did somebody think, we need another Indian guy? That's not fair for somebody who actually does have the chops, who did put in the work. So he would say, I just want to dismantle that whole structure and make things completely colorblind across the board. And that was how he handled his own business, right? Because he, among other things, he was a businessman, he was an employer, and hired lots of minorities of all kinds.
I mean, in that sense, are you convinced that Charlie Kirk was not a racist, Bethel, and that some of these quotes are, if you like, somewhat taken out of context of the wider argument that Charlie Kirk is making around these concerns around DEI?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, he could be intemperate. He was just kind of a little immature and unwise, I think, in how he phrased things. But, in terms of how he conducted his life, how he actually treated people, I mean, there's a beautiful little clip of a young single black mom who comes up to the microphone. She's carrying her baby, and he's like, how are you? What a beautiful kid that is. Just, praise God. What a gift from God. And so, this is not a guy who was like harboring deep-seated hatred against black people. That's just not who he was. And again, like, you can find one of my favorite TikTok genres is black TikTok Charlie Kirk fans who are kind of coming out of the woodwork and going, all right, y'all, everyone's telling me this guy's a racist. I'm watching a bunch of clips and he's not a racist. I agree with him on a bunch of stuff. What's wrong with you guys? And so, and those people don't feel, crushed underfoot, that they don't feel hurt or marginalized. In fact, they feel like they need to get out there and speak a word in defense of Kirk because they feel like he's been maligned.
Well, let me toss this back to you, Nijay. Where are your concerns in terms of what people are hearing and so on? Is it the specific kind of issue, controversial clips from Charlie, or is there something wider that you're concerned about in the kind of the way in which a lot of people have taken up the Charlie Kirk cause?
Yeah, I mean, here we are, two people with PhDs, arguing about definitions. What I think is good. What does it mean racist? Does it mean to hate all of one kind of people? I don't think he did. And one thing that I said, I may have not said it in the essay, but I do believe it. He loved the person in front of him. I believe that. I believe that based on what I've seen. I believe that based on him being a Christian. However, if you paint negatively with broad brushstrokes about whole people groups, in really broad ways, de-individualizing people, in ways that are negative and harmful, that could be referred to as racist speech. So, for example, what he said about Indian immigration, I don't have it in front of me, but he says it's the single most destructive piece of immigration legislation to allow visas from people from India, like my dad, to come to the United States to displace white workers. One of the problems with that is the government is not going out seeking these people. Businesses are. Businesses like my cousin, who's an engineer, businesses are seeking him out saying, will you come to the United States? We'll get you a visa. He's not saying, knock, 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 I've shown up to take your social services. And by and large, Indians actually contribute higher to the tax contribution in the United States than lower. So it's, to me, he said things that were sloppy. And so I'd say, in my opinion, he uses racist speech, even though he wasn't a racist. I don't know the man's heart. I tend to believe the best in people. If you could hang out with me and knew me, you might know that. But I think in James 3:1, not many of you should be teachers, my fellow brethren, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly, and it refers to the tongue as a spark that can burn a forest. So I think he needed to be more abstemious in his rhetoric to say, I'm concerned that we're giving out too many visas, too many countries. I think that actually the bigger issue is not Indians coming to the United States. I can't imagine anyone's ever met an Indian that didn't like. But I think the bigger issue is actually education. We need a stronger educational system in the United States to compete with these other countries. It's actually businesses that are bringing these people in. So I think the rhetoric, what people are seeing is a soundbite. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of people have reached out to me in the last 2 weeks and told me I took his quotes out of context. I've been teaching contextualized hermeneutics for 20 years. I know context. But if you say something like some of these inflammatory statements that he made about black people, about laughing about LGBT people thrown off of buildings to their death in Gaza, and saying, well, they don't have buildings anymore, and laughing about it, to me, at a certain point, it doesn't matter what the context is. It's that this is going to negatively affect people's perception of Christianity because they associate you with these words. And you could play the argument of context all day long. I know context. But to a certain degree, you have to be responsible for the actual words that you use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, and I think the word sloppy could be fairly applied to a number of those things. One thing I think is interesting is on several of these issues that you can generally find maybe 2 or 3 different places where he expressed a similar opinion, but you could tell he was kind of working on how he phrased it. And you could see that he was getting better. So, there might be a different context where he framed the immigration question, for example. And I think he framed it like more or less, kind of similar, Nijay, to what you were saying there. He's framing it from the perspective of our own house is not in order, right? I mean, we have so many issues, economic, educational. We're not taking care of our own people very well. We're not taking care of our own poor people very well. People can't afford housing, that kind of thing. We need to kind of just hit pause and say, we're full. We need to figure this out because we're not in great shape to be just welcoming tons and tons of new people. I mean, I think that's a fair and interesting, argument, debate to have. Did he apply it with maximal precision in the case of Indians and visas? That's not an issue I've personally examined in great detail. Obviously you have. And, maybe he was too hasty, too sloppy there. But I mean, I do think there is overall room for debate on a question like immigration, and I do think it's unproductive to say that, you know, anybody who expresses a conservative opinion or a right of center opinion just hates immigrants, right? And, you know, just, hates people from minority nations and is xenophobic. I don't think that's where Kirk's heart was. I think Kirk was just concerned to just figure out what we were doing first and move forward a lot more slowly.
We're going to have to start winding this up, but thank you both for some really helpful comments and some interesting interactions where you have disagreed as well along the way. I mean, it's interesting for me as a Brit, obviously, watching this play out to some extent in the US, which is a different context to the UK. However, only a few days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk here in the UK, we had a big march in London called the Unite the Kingdom March, but that was sort of being led by Tommy Robinson, as he's known, who is arguably, you know, a pretty divisive figure who has, you know, given a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric and sort of is leading, if you like, what many people consider to be quite racist or xenophobic kind of attitudes in the country. Having said that, when 150,000 people turn out for a march, you can't simply say they're all deplorables, they're all awful. Of course, there are going to be racists, you know, in that crowd, but there are also going to be people who are perhaps just feel themselves let down by, you know, the elites and are patriots more than, if you like, you know, xenophobes and everything else. I've used the same parable, interestingly, in this respect, as you've already quoted, Nijay, the wheat and the tares, that there's a lot of different things going on at the same time. One of the things I think is happening is a sort of spiritual renewal in the West, but it's coming with all kinds of baggage and mixed motives and all kinds of different things flowing into it. And right at the beginning of this year's season of Surprising Rebirth, you know, the big question we began with was, is this rebirth right wing? Something's happening. Secularism seems to be being challenged by a renewed interest in the value of Christianity and a lot of these intellectuals who are, you know, pointing people back towards the Bible, but often seemingly allied with conservative political interests and so on. Again, I just feel like this Charlie Kirk moment, as we, you know, start to approach the end of the year, feels like it's got all those same elements going on. I suppose the question that it leaves me, and, you know, this is a bit of a binary way of posing this, but where do you both think this goes? Is it the Erica Kirk vision, if you will, of Christianity, or the Trumpian vision, you know, love your enemies, forgive those who persecuted you, hate your enemies, and let's get this show back on the road by making America great again? Okay, that's a bit of a, you know, pejorative way of stating it, perhaps. But where do you see this going right now? Which of those visions, if you like, is, I'll start with you, Nijay, the one that you see currently making the most headway?
To be honest, I don't know. And what I said in my essay is, you know, the subtitle was "Now is the time to listen." I think that's listen to each other, but also listen to the Spirit of God. I think we're at a crossroads, to be honest. And I think we have to decide whether we're going to be all in on the man of the cross or not. Because co-opting Christian language has been done over the years for many generations. And so that's nothing new under the sun. But we've had revivals in the United States throughout the years that have been very, very good. I've been able to visit Asbury Seminary, where there was a revival not too long ago. I think that was genuine. I think it was powerful. It leads to united and believing prayer. And there could be bad things. I think what I would tell people right now is, I'm being a little evasive. What I tell people right now is what I tell people is take a year and study the Sermon on the Mount. You really can't go wrong if you do that. To me, that's the absolute best way to make sure that you have the right DNA as you are leaning into Christianity, perhaps for the first time. And go back and read some of the beautiful classics like Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship, and go back to some of these rich writings that have nourished the Christian faith for tens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of years.
Yeah. Well, yes, and I have to say, you know, that resonates with me. I'm very glad that a lot of people find their way to Christian faith via clips of Charlie Kirk on X or you know, Instagram Reels or whatever. I wouldn't want that to be the only place they find their Christian input, though. You know, it's going to be a fairly meager diet, whichever algorithm you end up being sucked into. Bethel?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is just going to come down to people's individual circumstances, what kind of churches they find, whether they find, a good Bible preaching pastor, whether they find community. One concern I do have at the moment is that I'm worried that certain Christian figures / thought leaders / disgraced pastors, I won't name names, Mark Driscoll, maybe seeing this as their moment to kind of jump back into the spotlight and kind of hijack this for their own purposes. And I would really hate for people like that to, get to sort of define where this goes. Something I thought was beautiful about the memorial was that, I appreciated Frank Turek getting up and preaching the gospel and sharing his heart and his friendship. And I love Frank's humility because he's not a celebrity pastor. He's not a big name. He was just up there, humbly sharing the gospel and sharing his heart. And, I think we need more figures like that who aren't just hungry for the spotlight, and like hungry for their own fame. And so, I want more people like that for these seekers to look up to, and hopefully they can find some of those humble people in their own churches. I would also say that, that a political conversion is not necessarily a bad thing, to the extent that leftist policies are anti-Christian. I think becoming more conservative could go together with becoming more Christian. But, the gospel should be central. Jesus should be central. And I've seen now multiple people who were inspired specifically by Erica's message. I saw one, this might be a good note to close on, but I saw a Muslim woman who said, I was raised Muslim in a Muslim country. I know almost nothing about Christianity. I watched this memorial and two things struck her. One was the spirit of joy and celebration, because she said in Islam, the spirit of a funeral is very dark and fearful. But here these people were celebrating this man's life, and I was blown away by that spirit of joy. And then secondly, Erica's forgiveness, which was just radiated love. And this woman said, if that's what Christianity is, I want more of that. I want more of that.
Well, that is a good place to end. Thank you very much, Bethel and Nijay. I'll make sure there are links to both of your Substacks and books and so forth from today's show. But thank you so much for joining me to discuss the Charlie Kirk moment. And I hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.